Morning. Welcome back. Top of the hour. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being early and for being on time. And what I'm going to ask everybody to do, just so that we have that timestamp, we'll give it a moment or two to see if other people are joining us. There are 70 people in the learning community now. And remember, this is part two of the three-part theory and practice of motivational interviewing. Just want to orient you. And go ahead and follow some of our colleagues' excellent leads by typing your full name into the chat. And if you're sharing your computer with anybody, please go ahead and type their full name into the chat too. Again, that's so we have the timestamp that you're here and that you're here for part two. Okay. So we'll give it just a couple of moments, folks, and then I'm going to make a few announcements. And what I'm going to ask you to be thinking about now, we're not going to talk about this right now, but I'm going to ask you to be thinking about this as we give it another few more moments to see who else is going to be joining us today. But think about, if you think back, and I know it was a while ago, but if you think back to part one of our learning community conversation about motivational interviewing, think back to part one from a very relaxed and gentle place. And what's the first thing, and again, just to hold this for yourself, what's the first thing that pops back into your head about part one? And don't judge it, just let whatever comes back to you, don't type it in the chat yet. Hang on to it, we're going to talk about it. But what's the first thing that comes back into your head about part one? And again, you don't have to type it in the chat at this particular point. I'm just going to ask you to reflect on that while we give it another couple of moments. There are now 94 of us in the learning community, which is fantastic. We'll give it just a couple of more moments, and then we will go ahead and get started. So you're reflecting on what, and again, Melissa, thank you. You don't have to put it in the chat yet. I'm just asking you to reflect on what's the first thing that comes back to you about part one. And if I'm saying part one and is mysterious to you and you're thinking like, well, part one, I don't believe I attended part one. I'll address that when I make my comments once we get started. Okay. So again, if you haven't typed your full name into the chat or the names of anybody you're sharing your computer with, please do that at this particular point. Thank you, Lori. And also you're reflecting on what comes back to you from part one. And you're just reflecting on that. We're going to talk about it in a little bit, but you're just reflecting on that. Okay. So we'll give it just another moment or two. 102 folks have joined us at this particular point, and we'll give it just one more moment, and then we will go ahead and get started. Welcome back. This is part two of a three-part MI training, theory and practice of motivational interviewing. This is part two of a three-part training. We have one more part next Monday that will also be 2 hours. I do want to reiterate to folks that in order to receive credit for this particular learning community conversation, you do need to participate in the full 6 hours of the learning community conversation. If you weren't here for part one, what I can say to you is you are more than welcome to stay, and you cannot receive credit for participating. You had to have participated in the first 2 hours, in addition to this 2 hours, and then the next 2 hours. So again, I will leave that up to anybody's discretion as to whether they want to remain or wait until the training is offered again. Unfortunately, we cannot give partial credit for participating in this learning community conversation. So again, that I leave that to your decision. At this moment, there are 107 people in the learning community, which is fantastic. And there will be a third part of this training next Monday, I believe, at this same time. So again, to get any credit whatsoever, you do need to attend all 6 hours. And unfortunately, due to this particular training, there's not any way to make up any time that you may miss. Okay. So I just need to say that at the very beginning so people can make a decision about how they want to proceed. All right. So what I'm going to do now, we have 115 people in the learning community. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take care of and review a couple of the logistical details and just remind you of them. And then remember the question that I'm asking you all to ponder that we're going to discuss briefly after we take care of the logistical details is when you think about part one, what pops back into your mind about part one. Okay. And there's no right or wrong there. It's just whatever pops back into your mind. And I'm thinking if it's okay, maybe we can start that conversation after I take care of the logistics. Maybe we can start that conversation if Dave Center for Prevention and C would be willing to unmute. And when we get to that point, Dave, if you'd be willing to unmute and comment on that, maybe we can start the conversation that way. But you can ponder that and you can always pass. If you don't want to comment at a particular point, you can always say, I'm going to pass. So Dave, you can be thinking about that. And then right after logistics, we'll check in with you again. I'm going to share my screen, folks. And I'm just going to remind you that we are at part 2, which is January 22nd. Part 1 was January 12th. Part 3 is January 29th of the theory and practice of motivational interviewing. Again, welcome back. I want to thank you for making the time to be here and to be part of this learning community conversation. And again, I really am excited for us to be talking about this again. And I'm looking forward to what happens in our conversation today. Because it's a learning community conversation, it's meant and should be relevant to what you need and to your thinking and your understanding. So what we talk about may not necessarily reflect the official views of our funder, and that's okay because this is meant to be a relevant, supportive learning community conversation for all 117 of us who are here today. As we engage in this conversation, like last time, I'm going to invite people to please be intentional about the language that we use as we talk to each other. Words do have power, and we do want to be putting people first. A couple of additional guidelines in terms of the words that we use as we talk to each other. Just a reminder, when you registered for part 1, 2, and 3, you did agree to have a working camera and a working microphone. So please be on camera if you can. A number of you have sent private messages or other messages to let me know that you're having camera issues or connection or internet issues. Thank you for letting me know. I'm really glad you're here. And I just want you to keep participating with what you have. I said this earlier in part 1, but I'll repeat it. And maybe this is the thing you remember as you're pondering what comes back to you about part 1. You should not hesitate during this learning community conversation. Don't hesitate to interrupt me at any point during this conversation. If you want to say something, if you want to make a comment, if you want to add something, you are more than welcome to unmute and simply say, I'd like to add some information here, or comment or reaction or ask a question. I don't mind that. What I would ask, though, is when one of your colleagues in the learning community, there are 121 of us now, 122, when one of our colleagues is in the learning community, what I am going to ask is please don't interrupt them. Let them finish their point, and I'll make space for you to add whatever you want to add, but please don't interrupt them. You can interrupt me, please don't interrupt. Because we're in a learning community together, this is a safe place to share another opinion, another experience, more information, another idea. We don't all have to agree. It's perfectly appropriate for us to engage in a dialogue about the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing. And then the last one is that I would ask is that we speak from the I. I had this experience. I believe this. I understand this. This is the information that I have. So I'm going to take the slides down for just a moment, and I'm going to ask you to wave, nod, throw money, give a thumbs up. Excellent. Just to let me know if you can accept. And Allie, you already agreed, and I didn't even say the question yet. So please send me your routing number and PIN for you. No, I'm kidding. But what I'm going to ask you to agree to, and you anticipated this, I'm sure, Allie, that if you can agree to the guidelines as stated. Wave, nod, throw money. Yes. Okay. Very good. Good. Excellent. Yep. Thanks, Mary Lou. Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. Love that. Okay. Good. So, Dave, if you're okay with it, are you willing? Yeah. Thank you so much. And what if anything? So I don't want to make an assumption here, but what if anything? And I hope something. But what if anything comes back to you about part one of our learning community conversation?
I'll speak about the conditioning with the ambivalence is opportunity. And to me, what I feel it means is as long as someone is weighing both sides of their situation, there's room to work with them. So that's what I took away from it.
Fantastic. Dave, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being willing to unmute and start us off. And I see that Spencer and Kalani want to add something as well. So Spencer, the floor is yours. And then we'll go to Kalani, and you'll let me know if I'm pronouncing your name anywhere. I'm not pronouncing it properly. You'll let me know, and I'll do my best. Okay, Spencer, go right ahead.
Yes, I definitely took away the ambivalence, meaning opportunity. One of the other things I took away, I didn't get all of the acronyms. I'll be open and sharing that part, but the PACE, partnership and empowerment, those two were really strong for me. They sat on me. I'm sorry I missed the other two in the middle, but I think those carried a lot of weight for me because it always speaks to just connecting with that individual, being their own agent of change and really sort of supporting them in that process. And I think that was what stood out for me.
Thank you so much, Spencer. And if it's okay with you, I'll fill in those other two if you'd like me to. Oh no, I think yeah. Do you want to say something, Kilani? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna bring up.
Oh, go ahead, and then you can share it with Spencer and the learning. Go ahead. Yeah, go right ahead,
Yeah,
please.
so what I took from the first one was PACE, and it's partnership, acceptance, compassion, and I got evocation, but
Yeah, and I understand why you would have evocation because evocation is what it was in MI3. And to Spencer's memory, in MI4, the newest version, it's actually been changed to empowerment.
okay.
Yeah, so that's what jumped out to you too.
Yes.
Fantastic. And please tell me how to pronounce your name. Yeah.
It's Kaylani.
Kaylani. Thank you so much. And I'll do my best to try and remember.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So I want to connect something that Kaylani and Spencer are saying before we go to Mark, and then I think William wants to say something too, which is I want to connect, Spencer, that you and Kaylani are noting partnership, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. And remember, folks, that's part of the MI consistent approach. That is how we want to be. And that approach is appropriate for any and every conversation that we have. And the practice of MI is not. And that leads me to what Dave was saying about when someone is ambivalent, they have two sides. Ambivalence about a particular behavioral change goal is a blank. Ring, ring, ring of the bell is a blank. And you can, yes, thank you, folks. Fantastic. Is an opportunity to practice motivational interviewing. So again, Dave, thank you for starting us off and linking that. And Kaylani and Spencer underlining the importance of an MI consistent approach as well. And also, Spencer, it really is not lost on me how you are connecting partnership and empowerment, that how that really resonated for you in your work, and similar to Kaylani as well. Yeah. Mark, the floor is yours, and thanks for your patience.
Not a problem. Thank you. So what stuck with me was the fact that we're not going by clients. What we used to say, roll with the resistance.
Yes.
That the client is ambivalent.
Yes. Yes. And you know, Mark, that's really an important distinction, because quote unquote rolling with resistance. And I'll actually, Mark, you prompt me to want to tell a very short, funny story about it. In Chicago, Dr. Bill Miller was giving a conversation, and I happened to be in the audience. He was giving a conversation about the updates, which we know that evocation in spirit has been changed to empowerment. And we also know that rolling with resistance really hasn't been around since the second edition of motivational interviewing. So Bill Miller says, you know, people still love to talk about rolling with resistance. They love that. And, you know, they love the way it sounds. And he said, it was really hard for me to let go of that when we did MI3, and it wasn't an MI3 and it's not an MI4, because he said he came up with that phrase because it almost, rolling with resistance almost sounds like Rolnick. Stephen Rolnick is the person he wrote the book with, and he thought it was like a little nod to Stephen Rolnick. And the reason that they let go of it was because what it was sort of saying is like, well, that person's resistant, and really resistance, we know, is not the same thing as ambivalence. Because like Dave said earlier, if someone's ambivalent, there's an opportunity, an OPP there. Brenda, you're very well conditioned. Fantastic. There's an opportunity. So absolutely. And it's funny. I love the fact that Bill Miller, the creator of Am I Real, you know, acknowledged like, yeah, I wanted to hang on to that too because I liked the way it sounded, and it was about, but it doesn't fit with the philosophy anymore or the practice. Yeah.
And you know another thing, Paul.
What's
and
that,
I don't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead. You can interrupt me anytime.
Oh, that's right. You said right. Absolutely. The resistance part, it doesn't even seem like strength based. It's almost as if like we're looking at this client already, and depending on practitioners, it can be internalized differently. They're not willing to work, so okay, I'm going to just let them go, or I'm not going to move further in that process. So I think that word resistance sort of helps to foster like a negative partnership to begin with.
I couldn't agree with you more, Spencer. And, you know, I love that you said that, because a phrase popped into my head. I have heard workers say, and I don't know if anybody else has heard this. If you have, you know, type a Y in the chat. But I've heard workers actually say, well, you know what? I told that person to come back to me when they're ready to change, because they're resistant. And I have actually heard workers, yeah. Shanna's like, oh, yeah, I've heard that before. Yeah, I've heard that. And the thing that's striking to me is that when a worker says that, especially if there's ambivalence there, they've thrown away an opportunity. And I agree with you, Spencer, that that's as the worker kind of stigmatizing or starting off with not a blank strengths-based perspective. You know, this person's resistant. You know, that just is not. Jessica says she would have no clients because she works with teenagers. Okay. Excellent. So I know a number of you put things in the chat that you also recalled from part one. And I want to just give another moment for anybody else who either wants to put something in the chat or who wants to unmute and share anything else that maybe, yeah, go ahead, Amanda, please.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
with motivational interviewing, I'm kind of used to looking at other perspectives. And so I kind of realized that you can almost flow chart motivational interviewing. Is that something that happens, especially with people that have speaking or hearing disabilities?
Amanda, can you say a little bit more about what you mean by almost flow chart?
So
Do you mean like a
basically,
visual kind of?
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. You know, I have not read or heard anything about the specific application within people who might have visual impairment or auditory impairment. I do know that sometimes there are visual tools, especially like if you're using the scaling questions on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very important to you and 10 being extremely important. How important is it for you to cut down the amount of weed you smoke on a daily basis? And I'm not asking you that personally. I'm reminding you of the example that I gave you last time. So sometimes what people will do is they will have an actual ruler on a paper and have like somebody indicate on that ruler. So sometimes people do visually represent, and I agree with you, Amanda. I think it could very easily be visually represented in some ways.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Angela writes, if a person is not ambivalent and they say they do not plan to change, can MI help them to consider a change? I love your question, Angela, and I'm thinking of Spencer and Kaylani as I say this, that an MI consistent approach can certainly help you because you continue to engage in partnership with them. You continue to offer them compassion and empathy. You continue to accept them, and you continue to support their autonomy. And if the person is indeed considering a change at some point later down the road, then you may have, ka-ching, an opportunity to actually practice motivational interviewing. If a person has no ambivalence and they absolutely have no desire to change, an MI consistent approach is a way. Yes. And Kim, I love it too about supporting people's autonomy, because let's face it, oftentimes if we're not supporting their autonomy and we are telling them what they should do, what we are actually inviting is resistance. They'll push back. Angela, the floor is yours.
So I'm asking those questions because, I work in a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah.
So basically, once they're stable, they're discharged. So now I'm not working with them any longer.
Right.
And their program that they are referred to may or may not even want to know what we did while they were in the hospital. So, but every little bit helps, I guess. It might still keep them open to change with whoever they go to work with later.
Absolutely. And this is also where an MI consistent approach can be very helpful. And Angela, your point is a really good one, because we can't guarantee that the people that they may receive services from after you use an MI consistent approach or have the ability to practice motivational interviewing. And they may also be very well trained and very well steeped in it as well. We don't know. But what I will underline and repeat is that even if there is no identified behavioral change goal, an MI consistent approach will help you in that moment, and it can potentially plant the seeds. And this is what you're alluding to, Angela, I think. It can potentially plant the seeds of the future focus on a change somewhere else in that person's journey. I agree with you 100% in regard to that. Excellent. And Rose, thank you for letting me know that in the chat, and I'm glad that Clyde was able to help you. Perfect. All right. So anything else that anybody, Emily, any Emily Trudell, anything stand out to you? And again, you can pass if you don't want to say anything, but anything that comes back to you in particular or stood out to you about part one?
Just opportunity.
I guess I really emphasized that, didn't I?
Mhm.
Very good. All right. So, okay. MI is not about motivating the client. The practice of MI is guiding them. Yes, yes, thank you. And it is employing. You really give me an opportunity to elaborate on this. And I think I said this in part one. The practice of MI is guiding, as our colleague put in the chat, and it's employing their motivations. It's putting their motivations to work for them. Now, you may remember, and I'm hopeful that some of you will remember this, I shared an example about a person who I was having a conversation with, a young gentleman who was considering cutting down the amount of marijuana that he was smoking on a daily basis. Now, if you remember that, type a Y in the chat. Yeah, and one of our colleagues, and I think it was Joseph, it went by very fast, so I may have missed it, but one of our colleagues typed OPP in the chat because yes, that is an opportunity. That's an opportunity to practice motivational interviewing because the young gentleman was ambivalent. Whitney's like, somewhat. I can neither confirm or deny fully that I remember the client. Excellent. Excellent. Somewhat. All right. Now, building on those of you who put a firm Y in the chat, does anybody remember what the young gentleman told me? I know it was a while ago, and I will repeat it, but I'm wondering if anybody recalls what the young gentleman told me. And Dave, I'm thinking of you as I say this, about his ambivalence. Because he had two sides that he shared with me. And I'm wondering, yep, he could lose his job. Emma also adds smoking was affecting his job and his relationship with his girlfriend. He was concerned that his relationship is at the crux. Girlfriend said he treated her differently. Yes. His wife didn't like it. Actually, girlfriend. Yeah. He essentially shared all the reasons others wanted him to stop, but it helped him connect with his friends, I believe. Yes, very well remembered. He was willing to smoke less to have a better life. Okay. Okay. And there's one other element I'm wondering if anybody else remembers. And I love the fact that people are putting this in the chat because then we can all kind of read it. There's one other element that he mentioned, and I'm going to repeat the whole thing in just a minute. But does anybody recall anything else that he said? Everything that people put in the chat so far, right on the money, really accurate, excellent. There was one other piece that he mentioned, if anybody recalls. He'll think about it. Yeah, he was, Robert definitely, and he definitely was thinking about it because he was talking about it and he talked about both sides. Elizabeth, bang. It's how I'm comfortable in my own skin and how I hang out with friends. And Elizabeth, let me just applaud your direct quote. And I'm wondering if you're able to unmute, can you comment on why you put that in direct quotes like that? Because I really want to applaud it. Are you able to unmute? And if you can, I'm really curious as to how that you remembered that so accurately.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I remembered that because it's part of active listening, right? And it's understanding where the client is so that you can meet them where they are and actually see the opportunity to begin with.
Yes. And Elizabeth, could you just confirm for the learning community, all 126 of us, that you and I did not meet before part 2, nor did I pay you or feed you what you just said?
Not, not at all, Paul. As a matter of fact, I still have it on my to-do list that I need to reach out to you. So no.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. And yes, active listening. Yes, exclamation points. And there's another thing I want to underline in terms of what Elizabeth demonstrated so well in the chat, is that it's really, really important to get the details as best we can. It's okay if we don't get them completely, but it's really important to get the details. And the fact that you're able to remember that so accurately, Elizabeth, in addition to being impressive, what I want to throw out for people to consider is that depth of detail will serve you in the practice of motivational interviewing.
Thank you, Paul. That's encouraging because this is, as I mentioned in the first session, my first MI, and I'm not a clinician. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And as you may remember, based on our conversation, it's not necessary to be a clinician to practice motivational interviewing. And yeah, you're very welcome. My sincere pleasure. So the young gentleman said to us, and I'm going to read Elizabeth's quote. I'm considering cutting down the amount of marijuana that I smoke on a daily basis. I smoke weed on a daily basis because it's the way I feel most comfortable in my own skin. And it's how I hang out with my buddies. My boss has mentioned, though, that if I'm back from lunch late one more time, he's going to fire me. And my girlfriend basically has told me that when I'm stoned, she says I don't treat her with the respect that she deserves. So that's what the young gentleman tells us. Now, I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then we're going to look a little more deeply at what he said. But let me ask you this, and I don't want you to think about this too much. I'm going to ask this question and just use the chat. There's 126 of us in the learning community. Just use the chat to register your response. Okay? Yes, no, unsure. Y, N, or U are the options. Don't send it yet because I haven't asked the question. But that happens a lot, by the way. So the question is this: what the young gentleman told us, is he a good example of resistance? Don't think about it. Just okay. So I'm seeing mostly N's. I'm seeing some yeses, and I am also seeing some unsures. Now, and I'm seeing some OPP. So, and I agree with OPP. That even rhymes. I agree with OPP. I would definitely, if I heard this client say this, my MI ka-ching bell would go off. Okay. So I do want to address, though, the unsures and the people who said yes. Because what I can tell you is sometimes people hear ambivalence as resistance because the person is talking about why they're doing what they're doing. And what I'm going to ask you to consider in terms of the practice of motivational interviewing. Yeah, and Brenda mentions reluctance and confusion. Yeah. What I want to try and help you to consider in regard to the practice of motivational interviewing, no matter how tiny that ambivalence is, it's still an opportunity. Because A, They're not in pre-contemplation. They're in contemplation. So they're thinking about it. And by the way, I'm, referencing the stages of change, the trans-theoretical model, which is not MI, by the way. But it helps in understanding the process of change. Also, we can adjust what we're listening for. We want to listen to all of it. And I'm going to use a technical term here. We want to capitalize, encourage, and employ the change talk. Now, and again, I'm just asking you to consider that in terms of the practice of motivational interviewing. Now, we haven't formally, and we may not even formally today, talk about change talk and sustain talk. These are two types of client language that are often the language of ambivalence. So if somebody was going to point out the change talk in what the young gentleman said, what is the change talk? And you can unmute or you can type it into the chat. So what is the change talk of what the young gentleman told us, which I just repeated? Yeah. And yeah, Jan, reasons for what is not working. I will reduce. I am considering. Yep. I will cut back. He had pros and cons for smoking. And again, I'm asking you, what is the change talk in what he says? He's thinking about the negative consequences. He's considering. Yes, that's all true. But what I'm asking you is, what is the change talk? Yes, thinking about it is part of the change talk, but what's the specific change talk that he offered? Any thoughts? Anybody want to unmute?
Can you
Yeah,
say it again?
Sure, but then I'd be giving you the answer. Yes, I can say it again. I could say it again, Mark. And I will say it again.
Cutting down?
What was that, Hillary?
Is it that he said cutting down? Considering cutting down.
That is part of it. That is definitely part of it. And to Mark's question, and I am going to repeat it again, to Mark's question, I'm going to repeat it again. But I'm going to repeat the whole thing. And some people have already identified this. And Hillary, as well as others, is right. It is, Hillary, you're absolutely right, because he said he's considering cutting back. That's change talk. Okay? There's also some additional things that are change talk. So Mark, because you asked, I'm going to repeat it again. Fantastic. And Mark, thanks for asking. So, and I'm repeating the whole thing. Yeah, Elizabeth is saying the part of me feels. Again, and we're trying to get, Nalo, do you want to say something before I repeat it?
Yeah, I think it has to do with sort of a growing awareness of his actions and behavior.
That's absolutely true. You're absolutely right. And I would say that dynamic is all part of it. And the question I'm asking is, and Mark, I'm thinking of you as I say this, the question that I'm asking is, what specifically is the change talk? What's the specific language that he offered that would be coded, can be identified using a validated instrument as change talk? And Hillary, to your point and to other people's points in the chat, and some other people put it in, but I'm going to repeat the whole thing because Mark asked.
Will asks too.
Will is asking too. Okay, fantastic. Part of it is the I need, but again, there are some specifics. And here's the whole thing. And Hillary, this one's for you. Yeah, I'm considering cutting down the amount of weed that I smoke on a daily basis. I really only smoke weed because it's the way I feel most comfortable in my own skin. And it's how I hang out with my buddies. My boss has told me, though, that if I'm back from lunch late one more time, he's going to fire me. And my girlfriend has also told me that when I'm stoned, I don't treat her with the respect that she deserves. Okay. Now, a number of what people are putting in the chat is kind of a description. And yes, Kelly, Hillary, and many others, and William, the I'm considering is definitely part of the change talk. But there's parts of the language that the client offered that contain even more charged motivation. And I'm going to put it that way. Contain even more charged motivation. Go ahead, William. Yeah, go ahead.
So,
and then we'll go. Oh, Mark, were you saying that? And then yes. I see. Yeah, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay, so is it the fact that he's saying that he's acknowledging that his boss is telling him that if he comes back to work late again, he's going to be fired, and his significant other is saying that he doesn't treat her with the respect that she deserves when he's stoned?
You got it, Mark. That, in addition to I'm considering cutting back. Hillary, go ahead. The floor is yours. You wanted to say something too. Go ahead.
Just that he's doing a cost benefit, like there's negative consequences that are happening, yes. And he's bringing them up. If I don't, these are consequences.
Yep. That's it exactly. And I want to link what Hillary and Mark just said. I want to be very clear that, Mark, what you shared is the actual change talk. A lot of the other stuff is the description around it. Diana writes, what about words that are not said, the tone of voice and his body language? Diana, that's all part of it. And that's absolutely something we'd have to take into account. But right now, what we're really focusing on is the change talk and the sustain talk. Kaylani, go ahead. And then we're going to go to Will. Go ahead.
Yeah, so to be clear, the change talk is him saying, I'm considering.
That's part of it, but it's also what Mark said.
Okay.
Mark, can you repeat it for Kaylani? What you said, which you identified very accurately and very clearly as the change talk.
Yes, that his boss, he's acknowledging that his boss is telling him that if he comes back to work late, that he will be fired. And that his significant other is saying that when he's stoned, he doesn't treat her with the respect that she deserves.
That is the change talk. Will, and then we're going to go to Hillary.
Yeah, what I was going to say was when he says, I'm considering, and he follows with the reason why he's considering, he's giving the two specific things. So that whole package is a change talk.
It is the whole package. And I want to underline what Mark identified and now has repeated for the second time. Thank you, Mark. I know you're working hard today. What Mark has repeated for the second time are the elements of the change talk that maybe hold the most meaning for the client and are going to be most motivating. We're going to go to Hillary, and then we're going to go to Spencer. I see that you unmuted, Spencer. Hillary, the floor is yours.
I guess, so you said change talk and sustain talk. So is it that these are the most motivating parts of why I should change, and these are the most motivating parts of why I would like to sustain what I'm doing?
You got it, Hillary. So Hillary, can I ask you a quick follow-up question before we go to Spencer?
Yes.
If you were going to identify the sustain talk that the young gentleman offered, What is the sustained talk? And it's important to be able to hear and discern both. We employ them differently, but we hear and discern both. Hillary, are you okay with me asking you that follow-up question?
Yes, he said that this is the most comfortable that I am in my own skin, and that that's what he does with his friends. That's how he feels comfortable with his friends.
You got it. You got it. That's the sustained talk. And Hillary, thank you so much for saying that. And Aaron, thank you for typing it in the chat, because I want to emphasize something here. And Spencer, please don't lose your thought.
Right.
Don't lose your thought. Please don't lose your thought. But I want to underline something here, and we have Hillary and Aaron to thank for this. Hillary, you very clearly articulated what the sustained talk is. I want you to understand, folks, and I'm also thinking of Dave as I say this, sustained talk is not bad. It is just what will keep the person doing what they're already doing. The change talk will help motivate and move the person toward what they are considering. And Kehlani and others identified that what the young gentleman is considering is cutting down the amount of weed that he's smoking on a daily basis. The change talk that Mark so clearly identified and has repeated twice already is the language that the client offered that will move the client toward the change he's considering. Hillary very accurately and Aaron very accurately identified the sustained talk. That language will keep the client smoking weed on a daily basis. Spencer, thank you for your patience. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Definitely with the change talk, it's almost the client really recognizing slightly this moment of making a decision on something he's not sure he wants to lose, right? I don't think I really want to lose this job. You know what? I'm comfortable for whatever the history is and the narrative is in the relationship, that I don't really want to lose this either. So it's that ambivalent moment, that opportunity moment where the client is actually sitting there and something sparked like a light bulb for himself to say, perhaps I don't want to lose this. Perhaps I don't want to lose this. And that's the moment. And I think catching it, and everyone here was speaking on the different points, losing jobs, relationships, but I think the meaningful part of it for him or her.
Yes, yes. And I want to underline, Mark, don't lose your thought. I want to underline something that Spencer just said, because Spencer, you're really tapping into something very important. And what Spencer's tapping into and what he just identified really eloquently, I think, is identifying what's important to the client. And both sides are important. But we're having an MI conversation. We are going to guide toward the change that the client is considering. And the change that the client is considering is cutting down the amount of weed. And to Spencer's point, the client has just told us what's part of his important consideration as he considers that change. And MI is about providing the opportunity for that person to verbalize that, and then we employ it. Mark, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I don't want to confuse anything, but is that also part of the darn, the desirability, reason?
Yes, yes, you're not confusing anything. That's exactly it. And to Mark's insight, I'm going to ask everybody at this particular point to use the chat, and I want you to type in these two words: darn, D-A-R-N, followed by cats, C-A-T-S, darn cats. And I'm asking everybody to type that in. Now, I like Cats, and I don't mean the musical, But darn cats is another acronym in the practice of motivational interviewing that helps us identify two types. And Mark, you've just moved the training very far forward, which is fantastic, but you've moved the training into an area that this training doesn't always get to. But your insight has moved the training into this area, and that's great. Darn cats is an acronym that helps us to identify two types of change talk. Darn stands for desire, ability, reasons, and need. So what is the young gentleman's desire to make this change? What is his ability to make this change? What are his reasons for making this change? And what are his needs for making this change? That's called preparatory change talk, meaning that the young gentleman is exploring his ambivalence and he's identifying, and we are helping him to identify and strengthen his motivations for change. The literature, and there's a great body of literature on the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing. The literature proves that the more we engage the client or the patient or the participant to talk about their desire to make the change, their ability to make the change, their reasons to make the change, or their need to make the change, the more they verbalize that, the more we employ what they offer, the more likely they are to CATS, which is commitment, activation, and taking steps. Yep, say it along with me. Absolutely. Excellent. Commitment, activation, taking steps. And that's called implementing change talk or mobilizing change talk. It's both. So darn is preparatory change talk. I'm exploring my ambivalence. I'm articulating my motivations. We are employing that and putting it to work. And if we're doing that and we're practicing motivational interviewing, because remember, we have an identified behavioral change goal, and we have Dave to thank for this, an identified behavioral change goal that the person feels ambivalent about, ka-ching, OPP. We are inviting that person to share their motivations with us, desirability, reasons, and need, and we are employing it, which can then lead them to commitment. I'm going to cut down the amount of weed I'm smoking. I will cut down. That's called commitment language. Activation. You know what? I can do this, this, and this to cut down the amount of weed I'm smoking on a daily basis. Meaning they start to plan. Taking steps, TS. Since I saw you last, I did this, this, and this, and it helped me to move closer to cutting down the amount of weed that I'm smoking. So implementing change talk is about identifying and strengthening the person's motivations. And CATS is helping to consolidate commitment language to planning and then actually taking steps. Okay? And we all have Mark to thank for connecting what the young gentleman said to the darn language. Desire, ability, reasons, and need. Thank you, MI. I think, Emma, you meant thank you, Mark. No, actually, it's thank you, M, exclamation point. So you did mean Mark. Excellent. All right. Will, is there something you want to say, or are you just unmuted, generally speaking? Okay, I think Will is just generally unmuted. Okay, I'm going to mute him. All right. So, folks, before I go back to another slide. I want to throw out one other thing that I'd like you. Yes, Rose says, kudos, Mark. I want to go back to one additional thing in regard to this young gentleman. So I'm engaging in this conversation with this young gentleman. He says to me what he said. We know, thanks to Hillary, we know, thanks to Mark and many others, that what his language shared with us included sustained talk as well as change talk. We are practicing motivational interviewing. We have an opportunity, so we are practicing motivational interviewing. So the question that I want to pose to everybody, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this, and then I want to get to a slide, and I actually have a video that I want to show you as well today. But I want to get to a particular slide, but I'm very curious as to what you think me, as the person who has the great opportunity to be speaking to this young gentleman, what do you think I should say next? The young gentleman just shared what he shared with us. He shared both sides of his ambivalence with us. So my question to you is, what do you think I should say next? And what I'm going to invite, you can type it in the chat, but what I'm going to invite is if anybody would be willing to unmute and then just speak to me as if I'm the young gentleman and just say what you think maybe I should say next. Because keep in mind, folks, we're practicing motivational interviewing. We have that opportunity because there's an identified behavioral change goal that the young gentleman feels ambivalent about. Hillary writes in the chat, compassion and keep him talking about Dharm. Okay, that's a great description. But what I'm asking you is, what would you actually say? Because it's very easy to describe what you would do. And MI is about being able to do it. Go ahead, William. I see that your hand is raised, and then we're going to go to Mary as well. So, William, what would you say next to the person?
So, Paul, let me see if I got this straight. You're telling me that on the one hand, smoking makes you feel good. You get to spend some time with your friends. But I also hear you saying that it sometimes causes problems at your job, that you might be late. And I forgot what the rest of it was.
Okay, so what William just shared with us is a form of reflection called the double-sided reflection. Okay, so that's one option. Mary, what do you think? And then we'll go to Layla as well.
I would say I hear that
you can just say it to me. Yep, just say it to me.
You're
I'm the young
spending
gentleman.
time with your friends, and you feel comfortable in your skin. Are there any other pros or any other positive things that happen when you smoke weed? Okay. And then listen for his responses, but also bring up, and you've mentioned about how your girlfriend feels disrespected, and that you also, your boss has kind of warned you about coming back late. Are there any other negative consequences that happen when you smoke weed?
Okay, so Mary, what you're suggesting, and Michelle, I think, is suggesting a similar thing. You're suggesting kind of a summary followed by an open-ended question. Well, excuse me, a summary followed actually by a closed question, because your question was, are there any other consequences associated with this? And that's actually a closed question. And P.S., closed questions are not bad. They are a tool that sometimes is very appropriate for us to use. So again, Mary is suggesting a summary followed by a closed question. Layla, the floor is yours. What do you think?
So Paul, I hear that you, so this job, your boss, you brought it up, and it seems as though it's really important to you, keeping this job. And it seems as though you and your girlfriend have a pretty good relationship because you brought it up as well. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about why this job is so important to you? How is it beneficial to you? How does it make you feel good? And let's talk about your girlfriend as well, and then see what can we do? What do you feel you can do to kind of then make that change to keep these things that you're identifying or you're telling me is something that's important to you. So why don't we discuss, why is it important to you? What do you love about this job? What, you know, do you want to be great at your job? What do you see in the future with this job? So that's kind of the route. I would want to stay in the positive, kind of in that kind of like not dismissing the other piece, but I want to stay in that space, because to me, if you identified it, it's because it's important to you. So I kind of want to make you focus there to just reinforce that and keep you in that headspace for a little bit.
So Layla, you actually did about 5 different things.
Oh.
Okay. And no, don't you, it's okay. You did about 5 different things, and I want to label all of them. Okay. Thing 1, you did a reflection of the change talk, followed by an invitation for an open-ended question, followed by a kind of another open-ended question, and your emphasis was about keeping it focused on the positive and not really asking for elaboration or even reiterating the sustained talk. Okay? So again, I just want to underline all those things, because remember, folks, there's no one right way to do motivational interviewing, to practice motivational interviewing. And it's selective and it's intentional. Okay? And before we go to Hillary, I just want to underline one other thing, Layla, that you did that I think is very appropriate to the conversation and very appropriate to the practice of motivational interviewing. It's 2 things, actually, and you said both of them, but I want to just underline them. 1, you said he identified this as important, so I wanted to reemphasize it, which is fantastic. And you also noted that you were guiding, you wanted to keep the conversation going in a particular direction. And I really want to underline, folks, an MI conversation is selective, it's intentional, and it's guiding the conversation in a particular way. And what Layla suggested was intentionally guiding the conversation in a particular way. And that is appropriate to the practice of motivational interviewing. And sometimes that's challenging for people because they think, well, that's not very client-centered. Well, it is client-centered. The client identified these motivations. The client chose this particular change goal that they're considering. MI is an intentional practice where we are guiding. So the fact, Layla, and you put it, I wanted to kind of keep the conversation going in a particular direction. That is very appropriate. And you described it beautifully. So thank you for that. Hillary, the floor is yours.
I think it's hard to, when you're not actually in the conversation, to say what you would normally say, but I think I would say,
you can just say it right to me, just like Layla did. Go ahead.
But I think the first, maybe one thing that we haven't said is like affirmation, and that like I'm really glad that you were able to articulate that so well, because that's a huge step forward, that you've identified something that you might need to change, and you've identified some reasons that are really important, and then kind of go into the same things that Layla was saying, like I heard you say these things, and guiding him towards, like, again, that darn, what is his desire, ability, and reasons and need for change, why, what, like focusing him on those positive things, like what are your strengths, what are the ways that you could avoid some of the negative consequences that you that you brought up.
Yep. And again, Hillary, you suggested a couple of things, 3 that I caught there, and let me label them again, like I did with Layla. 1, you suggested an affirmation. And the affirmation really was kind of centering about his like insight into this and that he was able to identify his motivation. Followed by an open-ended question. And then followed by sort of planning, like how would you go about achieving this? Okay. So you started to move into another phase of the work in the conversation. Okay. So again, lots of different ways of approaching this. And Hillary, since you're unmuted, would it be okay for me to throw out what I might do?
Yes, please.
And if you wouldn't mind being the young gentleman.
Okay.
And just for the purposes of the conversation, we'll call the young gentleman Hillary. Okay. So, and don't misunderstand me, folks. And I want to be very clear about this. I want you to simply apply practice labels like I did to what was suggested. I want you to simply apply practice labels to what I'm going to suggest. I'm not in any way saying that what I might do might be more effective or less effective than what anybody else suggested. But I want you to pay close attention to what I do. And then I want you to be able to identify what I did. Okay? Hillary, thank you so much for talking to me about this change that you're considering of cutting down the amount of weed that you're smoking on a daily basis. And I'm wondering if it would be okay with you if I summarized a little bit of what you've said so far.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. So as we've talked, you've really identified that your job is at risk and you do not want to get fired. You want to keep your job, and that the weed smoking is putting your job at risk. You also mentioned that your girlfriend has told you on a couple of occasions that she feels disrespected when you're stoned, and that is actually kind of causing a problem in your relationship with her.
Yes.
Yeah. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's what I said.
Okay. Did I leave anything out?
I could make something up.
Is there anything you'd like to add in terms of other thoughts about
Well,
why
she says I'm not listening.
So she's really identified that when you're stoned, you don't listen to her as closely as she'd appreciate, and that causes her to feel disrespected.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's stop right there. So that's all I'm going to do at this particular point. So what did I do? Let's put the practice labels. Go ahead, Mark.
You did some reflection.
Okay.
And
Affirmation.
I like how you thanked him for being there for his situation. You thanked him, made him feel welcoming, and you asked him for permission.
Yep. Closed-ended question, by the way. Would it be okay if I did a summary?
Would it be okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm gonna
Could have
stop
said
there.
no. Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. And I followed my reflection of, and you'll notice, folks, I only reflected the change talk. Very similar to what Layla did. I only reflected the change talk. Yeah, and Julie, I asked for sign off. I asked for clarification. Did I get that right? Did I leave anything out? Is there anything you'd like to add? And what the client added was the girlfriend has actually been very specific. When you're high, you don't listen to me very well. And I feel disrespected. Ka-ching, that's more change talk, folks. and I employed it. I offered it back to him. So think about it. He says it once, I reflect it back, and then maybe I include it in a summary at the end. Hillary, did you want to comment again, or is your hand still up? It's okay. If you want to comment, feel free.
I did notice the way that you were affirming was also giving partnership talk. So when you're asking for that, did I get that right? You're really saying I'm with you in this. I'm not doing this for you.
Yes. And Hillary, thank you so much for that. And if I had a check, I'd put it in the mail to you. But I want to thank you for that, because I want you to also keep in mind, folks, when you're practicing am I, you continue to interact in an am I consistent way. So Hillary, thank you for noticing that. I'm still building partnership with that person. I'm still accepting them where they're at. I'm still offering compassion and empathy. And I'm still hopefully empowering them to make a decision that's right for them. I will note one thing that I absolutely chose not to do. And then Will, I see you have your hand up, and I'm not sure if you want to make a comment or not. But feel free to unmute if you do. I'm just going to point out this one thing that I absolutely chose not to do. And I absolutely chose not to do this intentionally. I did not move to planning. I did not ask any open-ended questions about, well, what do you think you could do to cut down? I purposefully did not do that. And before we go to Will's comment or question or reaction, I just want to ask, does anybody have any thoughts about why I intentionally did not ask about planning?
Do you
Go ahead,
want?
He's still in ambivalence. He's still in ambivalence.
Okay.
Still have to work with the ambivalence.
Yep. So he's still in ambivalence. Yep. Go ahead, Hillary. What were you going to say?
Do you want him to move you?
Well, I love that question, because I want to get more change talk from him to get a sense of if he's ready to move from darn to cats. He has not yet said, I'm going to cut down. I will cut down. Yeah, so I'm helping to build. Yeah, and Julie beautifully noted in the chat, I don't want to push him into resistance. Because if my next question is like, great, so how are you going to go about that? I'm moving maybe too quickly. So again, I just want to underline, and I love your insights into this. I just want to underline, folks, I intentionally chose not to move into planning at this point. Because, as Mark said, there's still a great deal of ambivalence. He needs to do more darn talk, desire, ability, reasons, and need. And then we'll get a sense of whether it's the right time. Will, thanks so much for your patience. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Hold on. All right. I think you can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find myself, well, how do I put this? What you did, as you said, you addressed the change talk, right?
Yep.
And so depending on the situation, there may be a time where you also have to acknowledge, so to speak, the sustained talk, because that's what, it says, all right, it's doing something for him, right? And so I don't want to come across, I'm not saying you did, I'm saying that sometimes I want to make sure I don't come across as just negating anything he's feeling, that type of thing. I want to be able to have him understand that I do understand.
Yep.
I won't stop there because again, this is a process. Right now, we're just this role play is just a matter of a few sentences here and there, but it's a whole process, right? It could take
Yes.
15 minutes, it could take a half an hour, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really want to get at the spirit and the heart of what you're suggesting, Will. And I love the fact that you're mentioning this because sometimes people will say, well, hey, you didn't repeat back everything he said. And I say, when people say that, I say, you're right, I didn't. Because that was intentional. And to Will's point, though, sometimes, depending on the nature of the conversation, depending on the process, it's very important to communicate to the person that you also heard their sustained talk. But I'm going to show you, and Will, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. I'm going to show you a distinction that I'm drawing. Okay? And I also want you to observe the structure of my statement. And I'll just say it to Hillary because I got to speak to Hillary before. So Hillary, if it's okay, I'm just going to look at you as I say this because it's helpful for me to have a person that I'm looking at. So thank you for that. So, Hillary, we've been talking about this change that you're considering, cutting down the amount of weed that you've smoked. And you've identified that there are things that you get from smoking weed, and you've also noted that you're potentially at risk for losing your job, and your girlfriend has expressed frustration, maybe anger, upset, that sometimes when you're stoned, you're not listening to her as closely as possible.
Yes, that's what I said.
Fantastic. So again, I want you to acknowledge or note that if I'm including a reference to the sustained talk, I'm not elaborating on it. I'm acknowledging that it was there and that I heard it, and it's at the beginning of what I'm saying. And what follows is fuller elaboration with hopefully invite for elaboration of the change talk. Because let me put it to you this way. If I was to say to Hillary, Hillary, what I heard you say, and by the way, you'll notice I also didn't say what I heard you say or what you're telling me is, because those are kind of distancing stems. I want to make a reflection. And if I was to reflect and say to Hillary, you are considering cutting down weed, and you're considering that because you don't want to lose your job and you want to treat your girlfriend with respect. You smoke weed on a daily basis because it's how you feel most comfortable in your own skin, and it's the way you socialize with your buddies. If I say it that way, I've put the sustained talk at the end, I've elaborated on the sustained talk, and basically I've just affirmed the person's ambivalence. I'm not guiding toward the change goal. Now, when I went to social work school, I was trained to summarize everything. Practicing motivational interviewing is not doing a client-centered summary. It's doing an intentional and selective summary with the intention of exploring the ambivalence, strengthening the motivations toward the identified behavioral change goal. It's very different. And how you say it guides in a particular direction. And again, I go back to what Layla said earlier because I thought it was so right on the money. I want to keep this conversation going in a particular direction. That's that it has a focus, and the focus is on the behavioral change goal. And we are employing, asking for elaboration, affirming, reflecting, and summarizing the change talk that moves the person toward the change, not the sustain talk. To Will's point, we might have to acknowledge it, and that's called softening sustain talk. We don't want to give it the same life, breath, and space that we give the change talk. Okay? Fantastic. So we really have two final things that I'd like to do in the last 27 minutes that we have together. Okay? And one of them is I want to share a video with you. And I'm not going to say too much about this video. I'm just going to share it with you. I'm going to ask you to watch it. Let it sort of touch you the way it does. And then what I'm going to do is just let you sort of, I'm going to pose some questions and just ask you to respond to these particular questions. Okay? So that's what I'm going to ask you to focus on at this particular moment. And then if we're really fortunate in terms of our timing today, there's one other tiny little video that I want to share with you as well. Okay? All right, so let me share my screen for the first video.
Smoking.
Okay, so I finished the exam. Have some good news and I have some not so good news. Looks like you don't have any cavities, so that's the good news.
That's great.
However, I'm pretty concerned about something I'm noticing in your mouth. Actually, if you look up here, the roof of your mouth, I'm noticing a lot of irritation that's really consistent with tobacco use. And you had said on your form that you're not a tobacco user, so I'm just wondering what's going on.
I don't smoke cigarettes.
Okay. Well, as I said, there's a lot of irritation. In particular, like I was mentioning, up here in the roof of your mouth, it's turned really deathly white colored, and there's little red spots. And you probably didn't notice because we don't spend a lot of time looking at the roof of our mouth. But you're really damaging this tissue in your mouth, which can really cause some severe problems in terms of your oral health. It's called nicotinic stomatitis, and this is something we don't see in any patients who don't use tobacco. So maybe you're not smoking cigarettes. Are you smoking a pipe or cigars, or is there something else that could be contributing to this? Because I don't know what else might be causing it.
Well, the only thing, I've never smoked cigarettes ever. But when I go out with my friends, we like to go to, we like to go out to lounges and sometimes there are those nice young men that gift you different sorts of things. And we got some of those mini cigars, Swisher Sweets. They come in peach and grape. And that's the only time that really, I've ever really used anything that's got tobacco in it.
Okay. So I think that's a pretty common misconception because they're fruit flavored. People think they're okay. Those are really bad for you. Did you know that?
Really bad, but they're just cute little girly cigars.
Right. They're still cigars and they're still tobacco. And so they still cause lung cancer, oral cancer, emphysema, all those same kinds of things that you would see with cigarettes.
Well, I only use them just to relax. I mean, it's not like it's something that I would smoke 20 or 30 cigarettes a day. I mean, I only do it when we go out.
Well, at least you're not doing that. So that's good. But it's still causing a lot of problems. And as I said, I can see the evidence in the roof of your mouth. You're causing some serious damage, and this needs to stop. Have you thought about quitting?
Well, I didn't really know I'd started.
What do you mean?
I didn't really think that it was anything more than just like social drinking. Just something that I do in a social setting when me and my friends go out to the bars.
So you're going to quit then?
Maybe.
What do you mean maybe? I just told you how bad it is for you. It's messing up your mouth. You're putting yourself at risk for all these other diseases. This is really important. You need to quit.
Well, it's something that I'll have to think about.
What's there to think about? You said it's not that something you do all that often. There's all these negative side effects. There's all these risks that you're putting yourself in.
Well, it's just something that I do to relax, and I don't do it that often. And so I probably could cut back.
Okay, well, that's a good start, but cutting back isn't going to do it. If you actually quit the smoking, you can reverse all the damage you've done in your mouth, and you can stop yourself from being at risk for these other diseases. But as long as you're continuing to use these cigars, you're really putting yourself in a lot of danger.
Well, I don't believe that they're cigars. And what I do believe is that it's a choice, and it's my right, and it's something that I choose to do. And so I will think about cutting back, but I'm not at a point where I'm ready to do that. And I'm not really sure that I even believe that what you're telling me is real.
You're choosing to really damage your mouth, and actually it can cause problems with your teeth too. I don't know if you noticed your teeth might be getting yellower than they were before. That's another side effect. There are a lot of really negative things that go along with any tobacco use, whether it's cigarettes, cigars, dip, chew, snuff, snooze, hookah, any of it. This is a really important decision that you're making, and you said it's your choice, but you're really choosing to make yourself sick and potentially die.
Well, it's something that I'll think about.
Well, I appreciate you thinking about it. I hope you'll think about it really hard. You know, this is something that I'm going to continue to ask you about because it's something that really needs to change.
So thank you for watching that. So a couple of things. Let me just start by saying that I don't know if you're the type of person who likes to watch movies over and over again. I am, and I've seen this movie, this little video, about 803 times. And I'm not kidding. I'm not making that up. I have seen it that many times. And I never cease to enjoy it from a very bizarre kind of perspective. Yeah, I agree with you, Sarah. It's a hard watch. And try watching it 803 times. It gets harder, but it's very instructive. Now, I know a number of people have made some comments in the chat, but I want to ask you a couple of questions. Okay. So question number one, and it can be yes, no, not really sure, unsure. Okay. So why enter you? And here's the question. The question is do you think that this is a realistic conversation that a provider would speak to a patient in this situation? Somebody wrote sadly, yes. Emily is more optimistic. Maybe yes. And then Roxanne put, oh, absolutely. I love it. I love it. Oh, and Melissa has experienced it. Melissa, I'm sorry. And I hope it didn't cause like PTSD for you. I mean that seriously, because for some people, the dentist is a serious thing. Yeah. Yeah. So far it looks like a number of people are in agreement that this is actually realistic. And I would venture to guess it is. And somebody alluded to this in the chat, that it's an attempt to help with a very hard push. Now, I'm going to ask you to think for a moment. I'm going to ask you to respond in the chat again. I'm going to ask you to think for a moment. If you were the patient, if you were the lady with the pearl, and you could use one word to describe how the interaction with the dentist made you feel, what do you imagine the lady with the pearls? Emily's like, I'm looking forward to typing this. Yes. So I'm seeing shamed, angry, defensive, scolded, judged, misunderstood, attacked, defensive, vulnerable, annoyed, upset, shamed, shocked. Wow. Embarrassed, attacked, rude. Okay. All of the above, Karen. I love it. Karen, that's it. Get the full impact of everybody's contribution there. Annoyed. Yeah. Now I'm going to ask you an additional question. Yeah, and Roxanne writes, physicians are coming from a position of power, assuming their knowledge is more important than the patient's experience. While they might know more about how the patient's health is impacted, they are not typically trained to coach or support a patient towards behavior change. Yes, and that's really unfortunate because sadly, MI actually helps people to make changes as opposed to create resistance. And you know, I have to say, having my 803rd viewing of this video, when the patient said, "I'll think about it," I thought to myself, does she mean that? Or is she thinking, I'm going to think about calling my health provider to see if I can get a different dentist? Which actually leads me to one final question that I want to ask you to use the chat to respond to. Actually, I lied. There are two final questions I want to ask you. Question number one is, if you had the resources, if you were the lady with the pearls and you had the resources to find a different dentist, after this conversation, would you get a different dentist? And again, there's no right or wrong here. It's just yes, no, unsure. Okay. Some people are writing the word absolutely. Some people wrote the word maybe. Not sure on it. Excellent. And that's, you know, I'm asking you to just simply respond. Okay. And there's no, yeah. And Julie writes, I would just notice. And Robert writes, in a heartbeat. It's like pulling teeth, no pun intended. All right. One final question that I want to ask you about this, and then I want to make a statement. And you're going to be shocked at the statement that I'm about to make. But I want to ask you one final question. And before you hit send, I really want you to think about the answer for yourself. And this is just your gut answer. Based on what you saw in the video, does the dentist care about the patient? Wow. They care too much. I love that. I have never seen so many yeses in the chat response. And again, somebody just typed in unsure. Bedside weak. Yeah, that was very gently put. Bedside weak. I love that. I'm going to remember that. That's like as good as OPP. So yes, her care for the patient is for herself, not the patient. Yeah, very. I've heard that. I've read that many times. But yes, but not needing the patient where she's at. Yeah. So again, thank you. And so that I think is a very important thing for us to consider, because it is possible to care and still cause the patient to want to seek a different provider. And it has everything to do with how you interact with the person and your approach. Now, here's the statement that I want to make, and I want you to be very clear about this. The video that I showed you is not an MI consistent approach, nor is it the practice of motivational interviewing. I know that's a shocker, but I'm going to repeat it. The video that I just showed you is not an MI consistent approach, nor, yes, laughed out loud, nor is it the practice of motivational interviewing. It is what? I know, Sarah, I know. I'm sorry to confuse you, but I must. I don't want anybody to leave this conversation thinking that what they just observed was motivational interviewing or an MI consistent approach. It was absolutely MI inconsistent. It was not partnership, acceptance, compassion, or empowerment, nor was it the practice of motivational interviewing. In fact, what it was a wonderful example of a provider creating resistance, because they were pushing their agenda and telling the patient, being directive, Yes, Rose, she was too pushy, telling the patient what to do. That creates resistance. Okay? So I want to switch out from that video for just one moment as we take the last 12 moments that we have together. And I want to tell you a story, a brief story. I had the opportunity to be engaged in a conversation with a woman who her behavioral change goal, so it was an opportunity, and I'm thinking of Dave as I say this, she was ambivalent, both sides, Dave, she shared both sides in the conversation. Ka-ching, it was an opportunity to practice motivational interviewing. The change that she was considering is going from smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, 40, to 15. She wanted to cut down to 15 cigarettes a day. Her goal was a harm reduction goal. She did not want to become abstinent. She wanted to continue to smoke, but she wanted to smoke considerably less. Okay? That was her identified behavioral change goal, a harm reduction goal. Now I'm going to ask you to use the chat to use your best guess as to what you think her motivation was to want to cut down from 40 cigarettes a day, 2 packs, to 15. What do you think? Money? Yep. The cost, money, price, financial cost, dollar signs. Health, her health, oral health. She did not have nicotinic stomatitis, as far as I know. I now know what that is. Health and cost, time consumption, money, someone else's pressure, teacher. Yeah. Okay. Time spent, doctor exam, not good. Her pets. Health, fantastic. And I've asked you to guess relationships. I've asked you to guess. And thank you for that. What I want to underline, health and hygiene, perfect. Family, yep. Limits of where she can smoke, absolutely. Preoccupation, health and money, lung cancer, yep. And I want to underline something here, folks. When we are practicing motivational interviewing, and I want to go back to something Elizabeth said earlier, and what was mentioned in terms of active listening, when we are practicing motivational interviewing, our goal is to, as deeply as we can, understand that individual's desire, ability, reasons, and need to quit, to make the change. Okay? So we're trying to deeply understand that when we're practicing motivational interviewing. So I was engaged in a conversation with this woman, and she told me the following. Pay very close attention to this, okay? She said to me, you know, my 6-year-old daughter and I were watching television together. And we were watching a comedy program and we were enjoying it. We were laughing. I was sitting in the love seat and she was sitting at a side chair. And we're watching this comedy program. And she said a commercial came on TV. And she said, guess what kind of commercial it was? And I bet you can imagine. It was a quit smoking commercial where the person had a tracheotomy, where they had their fingers cut off, where they were dragging an oxygen tank. Yeah, COPD. Yep. And she said that she nor her daughter said a word. The commercial happened. They didn't say anything. And then the comedy show came back on and they were watching the TV together again. She said at a certain point during the conversation, she said she didn't realize it, but her 6-year-old daughter had gotten up and was standing right next to her at the love seat. And she said that the 6-year-old took her hand and she put it on her mother's hand. And she looked at her mother and she said, Mommy, I don't want you to die. That is why she was considering cutting down. In the practice of motivational interviewing, we are trying to deeply understand why someone is considering this particular change. So, having said that, knowing that that's part of what we're trying to do when we're practicing motivational interviewing, the thing that I'd really like you to think about, and I'd like you to think about this until we see each other next Monday, is because I was practicing motivational interviewing, and I'm asking you to think about this. I don't want you to put anything in the chat at this particular point. I don't want you to comment on it. I want you to think about it, and it's something that we'll discuss when we start up next Monday. But what I want you to think about is, and I'm framing it this way specifically as I'm thinking about what Mark shared with us when he identified the change talk that the young gentleman who was considering cutting down the amount of weed he was smoking is. What the woman said to me was her change talk. And what I want you to think about is, since I was practicing motivational interviewing, what do you think happened next? So I want you to just think about that. And I want you to be prepared to talk about that when we see each other next. Okay? So I just have one slide that I want to show you, and it's really a restatement slide. But I just want to share this one slide with you, and then I will take the slide down and say just one more thing, and then we'll be done for our time together. So I just want to remind you folks, as you think about the practice of motivational interviewing, and you think about an am I consistent? Angela, I see your hand is up. You go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
This is just an aside.
I love asides.
I had an aunt who was a principal, and this was about maybe 34, 35 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had a cousin who was probably about 7 or 8 years old. And she always saw my aunt smoking. So one day at school, they gave them a hologram card that had a witch on it that had her smoking. And that wasn't smoking, she was healthy. And then when you flipped it over, you changed it a little bit, you saw her face from the smoke and the cigarettes, like destroying her face. My aunt stopped smoking that day and hasn't smoked since. So it came from a kid, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to that, Angela, thank you. And to that end, who the message comes from, where the motivation is, it has a big impact on the person because of their relationship, because of all. Yes. So thank you. Thank you so much for adding that. So just a reminder, and this may seem sort of, it's just a way to underline that. Remember, folks, that motivational interviewing is a client-centered conversation between two collaborating partners. The practice of motivational interviewing, it's focused on a specific behavioral change on which the person feels ambivalent. They are of two minds, just like this woman that I described. She had a harm reduction goal. And we are intentionally guiding the conversation, very similar to what Layla said earlier. We want the conversation to go in a particular direction, in the direction that stays focused on exploring the ambivalence about the particular behavioral change, and that it increases that person's personal motivations to consider the change and to move toward that change. And again, this is going to be included in the slides that you get, but I just want us to be very clear, folks. An am I consistent approach is the way we are when we're engaging. It can be used in any and every conversation. And the practice of MI is when there's an identified behavioral change goal that the person feels ambivalent about. There was a part of this woman that wanted to continue to smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And there was another part of her, based on what I told you, that wanted to cut down. And that created the opportunity to practice motivational interviewing. And we did find out about some of her desire. The thing I'm asking you to consider and to think about is, what, if I'm practicing motivational interviewing with her, what came next? Okay. And you're thinking about that. That's going to be your preparation for next time. Final thing that I'm going to ask you to do. Before I tell the final thing, let me just say thank you for everything that you brought to the conversation today, for the fact that we got to practice some, and that we've moved much deeper into MI than we generally get to do in the second session. And again, we have Mark and others to thank for that. The thing I'm going to ask you to think about at this particular point, if there's one word that could describe your experience today of our time together in the learning community, what's that one word? And just type it in the chat. There's no right or wrong here. It's just the one word that stands out to you about your experience of our conversation today. Okay. Folks, thank you so much. I'm very much looking forward to next Monday. I wish that it was a 9-hour training and we could have more time after that, but there'll be trainings in the future, and hopefully we'll be in the learning community again. But I'm very much looking forward to next Monday. And remember, we're going to start with the lady who was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day and wanted to cut down to 15, and what I shared with you about that. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Take good care and have a wonderful week. Thank you.